The grand ballroom of the Fairmorn Manhattan glowed with the warmth of 100 chandeliers. It was late spring in New York City, and Central Park outside was already lush, the city thrumming with its usual cocktail of anticipation and electricity. I stood at the heart of it all, surrounded by the muted hum of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft strains of a jazz trio. My wedding dress, tailored perfectly to fit my broad shoulders and the slightly awkward posture I'd never quite lost from my years in the army, shimmered with every step. The lace and satin felt oddly heavy, as if weighted by all the expectations and silent judgments swirling through the room. Today was supposed to be my day, my victory lap after 8 years in uniform, 3 tours overseas, a Bronze Star, and 1,000 nights wondering if I'd ever find something as steady and true as service. My fiancé Jason, calm and open-hearted, stood by the bar talking with my old squad mates, all of whom still called me a Cappy out of habit. My best friend Rachel had wrangled the seating chart, my fellow veterans had arranged a surprise toast, and even my Aunt Megan had flown in from Seattle to be here. By all accounts, this was a day meant for celebration. But as the band transitioned to a slow, brassy tune, I saw my mother weaving her way through the crowd toward me, her face an immaculate mask of composure and charm. Deborah E. Debbie E. Clark was a force of nature, the sort of woman who believed in order, legacy, and the sharp edge of tradition. Her pearl earrings glinted under the lights as she stopped just inches from me, her perfectly manicured hand holding a champagne flute. For one wild moment, I let myself believe she was coming to finally give me her blessing, to say she was proud of her soldier daughter, her only child who'd come home in one piece, medal and all. But as she leaned in, I caught the familiar, expensive scent of her perfume, a cold blend of gardenia and something sharper. She lowered her voice, her eyes glittering with a cruel sort of clarity. "You're dead to me," as she whispered, her words sliding beneath my skin like an icy blade. I didn't have time to react, didn't even register the shift of her wrist, before the stem of her glass came hurtling toward my temple. The rim smashed against the side of my head, the pain blooming white-hot and immediate. The world seemed to fracture, the tinkle of shattered glass, the icy splash of champagne running down my face and soaking into the bodice of my dress, the gasp that rippled out across the guests like a wave. I staggered but didn't fall. For a split second, everything receded, the music, the voices, even the ache in my skull. My vision tunneled to the flicker of satisfaction that crossed my mother's face before she replaced it with the perfect mask of concern, already calling for ice and fluttering her hands as if to rescue me from some unfortunate mishap. People surged forward, Jason's voice, rough with panic, cut through the static. He reached for me, his hands gentle on my arms, his blue eyes wide with shock and a growing anger. Rachel was close behind, her mouth open in disbelief. And my sister Haley, ever the picture of grace and effortless beauty in a dress just a shade off white, stood back with her hand pressed to her lips in feigned horror. But her eyes sparkled with the thrill of the scene, the way only a golden child can thrill in someone else's humiliation. Time seemed to slow. I tasted the metallic tang of blood, felt the cold soak of champagne running down my cheek. Every instinct screamed at me to lash out, to drop the mask and reveal the truth of what had just happened in front of 200 witnesses. But years in the military had taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing. Not yet. Not until you know your enemy's next move. Phones began to rise, faces twisted in shock and speculation. Someone was already whispering there would be footage online before the night was through. My mother, ever the tactician, dabbed at my hairline with a napkin, her voice pitched for maximum sympathy. Poor Allison, she must have fainted, so fragile after all that stress. I saw her glance toward her circle of friends. confirming that the narrative was hers to shape. But I was done playing her game. I straightened my spine and leveled my gaze at her. This wasn't just another skirmish in our lifelong war, it was a declaration. I would not give her the satisfaction of watching me break. Not after everything I had survived. As the paramedics arrived and someone thrust an ice pack into my hand, I caught Rachel's eye, steady, furious, loyal. Jason squeezed my shoulder, a silent promise that he was there, no matter what came next. And in that moment, surrounded by the detritus of broken glass and broken illusions, I realized that this was not the end. It was the opening salvo in a battle for my future, a future I intended to seize, no matter the cost. My mother had always believed in power structures. To her, family wasn't about love or acceptance, but about hierarchy. The Clarks had roots deep in New England, with every holiday dinner doubling as a boardroom, every family gathering an audition for worthiness. Debbie Clark had spent her life cultivating influence in Manhattan, on charity boards, at exclusive tennis clubs, with the right names on every invitation. My father, Michael, had always been content to play the role of the loyal vice president, never challenging her in public, always gentle and silent, as if hoping quiet endurance would protect him from her sharper edges. My older sister, Haley, had been cast in the role of golden child from the beginning. She was born 2 years before me, with that luminous smile, straight A report cards, scholarships, and a talent for dazzling adults. As a kid, she danced at the Metropolitan Ballet, then studied at Yale, each success praised and showcased as a family triumph. I was always the other one, a supporting character in her story, summoned when my presence was required and dismissed when I might disrupt the show. From an early age, I understood my life was a collection of invisible boundaries. My clothes, my haircut, my friends, even the way I laughed, were subject to my mother's subtle corrections. She orchestrated my birthday parties, chose my extracurriculars, and was quick to remind me, in private, that gratitude was expected for everything provided. Any achievement I earned was credited to Haley's example. Any stumble was further proof that I needed guidance. It wasn't always so overt. After my first deployment, when I came home changed, tougher, a little more cynical, my mother stopped criticizing my choices directly. Instead, she wielded other weapons, a missed introduction at a dinner party, a pointed joke about army boots at a black tie event, a story told in my absence about my ungrateful attitude. She was never cruel in a way that could be quoted, but her intent landed every time. That was the battlefield I returned to after my service. I never expected gratitude, but I did hope, somewhere deep down, that being a veteran might finally earn me a place at the table. Instead, it seemed to confirm her suspicions that I would never fit her vision for our family. When I met Jason, steady, kind, unflappable, my mother's disappointment barely flickered beneath the surface. He was everything I needed, a teacher at a local high school, a volunteer at the VFW, someone who understood why some nights I woke with old fears. But Jason wasn't her type. He didn't come from money, didn't care for cocktail parties, and had no interest in posturing. From our very first dinner together, I could sense her cataloguing his flaws for later. She began probing for weaknesses. At family gatherings, she'd find ways to undermine him in conversation, hinting at his lack of ambition, asking pointed questions about his plans, subtly suggesting he wasn't a suitable match for a Clark daughter. To my face, she was more careful. To others, she let her doubts be known. Allison could do better, as she'd whisper, if only she'd listen to Haley's advice. She even floated the idea, only half joking, that Haley knew several successful men in her social circle who'd be a better fit. The closer we got to the wedding, the more obvious her maneuvers became. She called vendors behind my back to confirm decisions I'd already made, changed seating arrangements at the rehearsal dinner, and tried to swap my chosen photographer for one who understood the family's image. When I stood my ground, she doubled down, acting as if I was causing chaos, as if my independence was a threat to the entire family's reputation. Through it all, my father never intervened. If I pressed him, he'd mumble that my mother meant well, as if intent could erase injury. Hayley, meanwhile, flourished in the tension, offering to help me with wedding plans, all the while reminding everyone how lucky I was to have such support. In the army, I'd learned to read a room for danger, to trust my instincts when something felt off. And in those final weeks before the wedding, I knew in my gut, that my mother was planning something big. I could see it in the way her eyes lingered on me at family dinners, in the tightness around her mouth whenever Jason entered the room, in the sudden, sharp silences that settled over conversations when I spoke. But I didn't yet know the form it would take. I didn't know she would choose violence, public, spectacular, and irreversible, as her final statement. What I did know, with absolute certainty, was that she would not let me leave that ballroom without reminding me exactly where she believed I belonged. The morning of the wedding broke clear and bright over Manhattan. The bridal suite overlooked Central Park, sunlight streaming in through tall windows, reflecting off the river of taxis below. There was a tension in my chest, not unlike the hours before a mission, the sense that something was coming, something I couldn't control but had to be ready for. I sat at the vanity as the makeup artist dusted blush across my cheekbones, hearing the faint clatter of silverware from the reception hall, the muffled jazz notes from the band warming up, the soft footsteps of hotel staff moving with practiced precision. My dress fit perfectly, every seam, every bead, every inch exactly as I'd envisioned. But wearing it felt strangely heavy, as if I was armoring myself for battle, not celebration. When I stepped into the hall for pre-ceremony photos, I saw the first sign of sabotage. My place card at the pre-dinner gathering had been moved from the center table beside Jason to a corner, half hidden behind a towering bouquet. In the heart of the room, my mother and Hayley held court at the largest table, their laughter spilling over the music, drawing guests like moths to a flame. And as I stood there, adjusting the strap of my dress, I understood the real nature of the fight ahead. This was more than a family feud. It was a campaign, one I'd been drafted into before I was old enough to realize what war looked like. For a moment, as I stood off to the side in my own wedding dress, I wondered what her normal family felt like. Maybe, in some parallel universe, there was a mother helping her daughter adjust her veil, not plotting her downfall. But in my world, this world, I was left standing alone, watching the story of my life unfold as if I were a guest at someone else's party. The pre-reception mingle was already in motion. Guests, some family, and many friends from my army years, drifted through the glittering ballroom, champagne in hand, exchanging pleasantries. I caught the eye of Captain Mark Bryant, my old squad leader, now a New York firefighter, who winked at me, sensing my nerves. He knew me before all the medals and scars, before I ever learned what it meant to take command under fire. His presence calmed me. But the moment didn't last. Across the room, Hayley, perfect, radiant, the chosen one, wore a dress so close to white it was almost a challenge. She welcomed every guest as if she were the bride, basking in their praise and snapping selfies for her Instagram followers. Each time a guest approached, they instinctively looked to her for direction, as if my own wedding was simply the latest scene in her lifelong performance. When the MC introduced the wedding party, he talked at length about Hayley's charity work and successful event business, her latest accomplishment, courtesy of my mother's social network. My own name was barely mentioned. I was simply the bride. I smiled for the cameras, teeth tight behind my lips, but my eyes kept scanning the room, just as I'd been trained. I saw Rachel at the edge of the dance floor, her gaze reassuring. I saw my army friends cluster together, eyes narrowed at the spectacle but determined to support me no matter what. I saw the quiet sympathy in the face of Aunt Megan, who'd always called out my mother's games, even when nobody else dared. My mother, meanwhile, glided from table to table, checking centerpieces, greeting hotel management as if she owned the building, touching Haley's shoulder in a show of solidarity. Their laughter carried above the music, crisp and deliberate. Every detail of the event felt engineered to move me to the edge, literally and figuratively. There were moments, standing there, when I almost laughed. All those years of marching through sand and smoke, only to find my most dangerous battlefield had a view of Central Park and a champagne bar. But it wasn't funny, not really. I'd fought to get to this point. I'd survived IEDs, I'd pulled wounded soldiers out of burning homes, I'd earned respect on battlefields where my mother's rules couldn't touch me. Yet here, in the city I once called home, every old wound was being reopened, every insecurity exposed. And I was expected to smile through it all. The pre-dinner announcements were a study in erasure. When my name was finally called, it was without warmth, as if I were just another piece of decor. I felt the sting, but forced a smile. I'd learned to keep my composure under fire. I could do it here, too. As the night moved on, I noticed Haley's subtle digs, her whispered comment as she hugged me for the cameras, "Enjoy it while you can." The chill in her voice was for me alone, the warmth for the photographers. I answered with a smile so practiced it could have been carved from stone. Meanwhile, certain guests glanced at me and quickly looked away, their expressions polite but distant, the kind of faces that telegraph judgment. The rumors, it seemed, had already started. I knew my mother was orchestrating something, but I didn't know what. I watched as she navigated the room, checking with the hotel manager, overseeing the smallest detail, always in command. Every touch, every gesture toward Haley reinforced their alliance, public and unbreakable. As I moved through the room, my military instincts took over. I catalogued everything: who spoke to whom, who avoided me, who whispered when I passed. The army had taught me to read the subtle signs of a coordinated attack. This, whatever this was no accident. It was a campaign, and I was its target. I slipped away to the ladies' room, just for a moment, to catch my breath. My reflection in the mirror was both familiar and strange, a woman in white, decorated with bruises nobody else could see. My head still throbbed where the champagne glass had landed, and I pressed my fingers to the swelling beneath my hairline. "You survived worse," I told myself quietly, "and you'll survive this." When I returned, the reception was in full swing. The band played a swinging jazz number, guests chatted, laughter bubbling up from the bar. I tried to lose myself in small talk, but my mind was already 2 steps ahead, analyzing the terrain. That's when my mother appeared at my side, all smiles and empty concern for the eyes of those around us. She leaned in, her perfume once comforting, now a trigger. "You're dead to me," she hissed again, quiet enough for only me to hear. Before the chill had fully settled, her hand moved, the same calculated motion as before. The rim of her champagne flute connected with the side of my head in a bright, sharp crack. Shards bit into my skin, cold liquid running down my neck. Gasps tore through the room, music stuttering, the violinist faltering mid-note. The world went white with pain. I didn't collapse, though my knees threatened to buckle. Instead, I locked my jaw and stared at her, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry out. My mother's mask dropped for a split second, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes before she resumed her performance, calling for ice and help as if she were the hero. Jason rushed to my side, steady and protective, while Haley pressed her hand to her mouth in mock horror. I saw the tiny, triumphant smirk at the corner of her lips. She'd known this was coming, or maybe helped plan it. A handful of guests hovered at the edge of the chaos, unsure if they should intervene or pretend nothing had happened. The band played a few more measures, then the song dissolved into silence. The whole world narrowed to a throbbing ache and the sensation of cold champagne and humiliation soaking my wedding dress. Yet even as my mother dabbed at my wound, whispering words of fake comfort, I made a silent promise: this is not the end of my story. It's just the beginning. The ballroom of the Fairmorn Manhattan was suddenly hushed, 100 pairs of eyes locked onto me and my mother, champagne dripping from my hair, the jagged rim of her shattered glass still glinting near my feet. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to tip sideways, past and present overlapping in a confusing blur of pain, memory, and adrenaline. But I'd been in chaos before. In Afghanistan, the sound of mortars in the distance meant you had a split second to act, to assess, to survive. Here, the enemy wasn't an insurgent hiding behind a crumbling wall. It was my own mother, standing in the open, daring me to retaliate in front of everyone who mattered to her. I took a breath. Slow. Deliberate. I could feel the pulse in my ears, my vision narrowing and sharpening all at once. Jason's hand on my back was a lifeline, grounding me in the present. My best friend Rachel slipped to my side, eyes blazing with a fury I recognized from our training days. For a heartbeat, I saw myself through her eyes, not as a humiliated bride, but as a survivor. Someone who'd been underestimated before, but never truly beaten. Across the ballroom, Haley was still holding her pose, hand to her mouth, eyes wide for the cameras, but with that secret curve of satisfaction. I saw it all now. This wasn't just about my mother's control or Haley's need to outshine me. It was about erasing me. My wedding day was just the latest stage for their long-running play, one where I was written out of the script as soon as I stepped out of line. I steadied myself, ice pack pressed to my throbbing temple, my dress ruined. A hotel staff member hovered nearby, apologizing on behalf of the venue as if it were their fault. People began to murmur, glancing down at their phones. In the social media age, it wouldn't take long for videos to appear online. My humiliation was about to become public record. But I refused to give my mother what she wanted: a meltdown, a public scene, confirmation that I was unstable, ungrateful, or damaged by the army. Instead, I did what I'd done during every hard deployment. I compartmentalized. I put my pain and my anger in a box and locked it away for later. Thank you for your concern, everyone. I'm all right, I said, voice steady, eyes meeting those of my most important guests, my military family, my real family. I saw confusion in some faces, pity in others, but I also saw respect. I was reclaiming control, if only by refusing to react the way my mother hoped. Jason, bless him, was trembling with anger. "Oli, do you want me to call security?" "The police?" he whispered. I shook my head. "Not yet." "This isn't over," I murmured. Just then, Rachel slipped her phone into my hand. I glanced at the screen and saw, in crystal clarity, a video of my mother's attack. She had recorded it, my mother's hissed words, the deliberate swing, the glass shattering. It was proof. Not hearsay, not a misunderstanding, but undeniable evidence. "You're not crazy," Rachel whispered, her grip steady. "We have proof." A wave of relief and renewed purpose surged through me. All those years I'd been told I was overreacting, imagining slights, being too sensitive. This time, there would be no gaslighting, no way to rewrite history. This time, the story would be mine. My Aunt Megan approached quietly, her presence a balm. She pressed an envelope into my palm, her words soft but fierce. "You don't have to do anything tonight. But you hold all the cards now." Inside the envelope were printed screenshots, messages between my mother and Haley. Planning my humiliation. "I can't believe," I started, but Megan shook her head. "You've always been strong, Allison. Now let them see it." With Rachel and Megan on either side, I walked out of the circle of chaos, Jason following. In the corridor outside the ballroom, away from prying eyes, we regrouped. "Here's what we do," I said, my voice growing stronger with every word. "We don't let her set the narrative. We wait. We make sure everyone knows the truth, on my terms." I thought about all the times my mother had twisted stories, turned relatives against each other, played puppet master with my life. Not this time. My army training kicked in. This was about information, timing, and control. Rachel was already uploading the video to a secure drive, ensuring it couldn't be deleted or tampered with. Megan assured me the messages were legitimate, sourced from a friend who was uncomfortable with the plan. Jason promised he'd stand by me no matter what, his love a steady presence even as the world spun sideways. I returned to the ballroom with my chin high and my dress stained but my resolve unbroken. I moved from table to table, accepting congratulations, making small talk, thanking people for coming. Every step was deliberate, a message that I would not be erased or pushed to the margins. My mother, sensing something had changed, watched me with narrowed eyes. Haley kept close to her, their alliance brittle but desperate. Inside, I was already planning my next move. The army had taught me never to launch an attack without a strategy. Tonight, I would gather my allies, count my enemies, and choose my battlefield. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. And when it did, it would not be on my mother's terms. The rest of that evening was a masterclass in survival, though not the sort I'd learned on deployment. This was psychological, navigating an enemy that wore your face, bore your name, and claimed to love you. I moved through the reception like an officer on patrol, each step calculated. I shook hands, accepted their kisses, and smiled for photos as if nothing had happened, even as pain pulsed beneath my hairline. All the while, I watched. I observed who whispered behind their napkins, who avoided my gaze, and who offered real concern. Some guests, a handful of my fellow veterans, Aunt Megan, Jason's family, clustered protectively near me. Others, like my mother's bridge club and Haley's sorority sisters, circled her and Haley, eager to believe whatever story they'd be told. The evidence Rachel and Megan had given me burned in my pocket. Rachel's video was digital gold, a clear shot of my mother's face, her arm, the champagne flute, the look of victory. Megan's envelope was heavier, printed texts with timestamps and names, a paper trail of malice. As I made my way through the crowd, I realized that while my mother and Haley were skilled at manipulation, they'd gotten careless. Maybe they'd grown too sure of their power, or maybe they truly believed that no one would ever stand against them. But this was not a military operation. There were no formal ranks or written rules. This was family, with its own invisible code of loyalty, betrayal, and secrets. I slipped away again, this time with Jason and Rachel in tow, into a small side room reserved for the wedding party. There, away from the noise, we could finally speak freely. Rachel queued up the video on her phone, and the three of us watched it together. My mother's words were unmistakable. The glass arced with intent, not accident. In the background, Hayley's head turned just a fraction of a second before the impact. She'd known, too. "Ali, this is enough to destroy them," Rachel said, her voice low. "But if you go public too soon, she'll spin it," Jason finished, rubbing my shoulder. "She'll play the victim. She's been practicing for years." "I know," I said, more tired than I'd ever felt after any battle. "But I'm not giving them another chance to paint me as unstable. This is my shot." As we strategized, Aunt Megan knocked quietly and joined us. She brought news, more messages. "There's a family friend. She felt sick about what they planned," Megan explained, handing over another set of printed screenshots. "They wanted you isolated, your confidence shaken. It's all here, moving your seat, the MC's script, the photographer switch. Even a line about making sure you don't stand so tall by the end of the night." It wasn't rage I felt, it was clarity. My whole life, I'd doubted my instincts, tried to give my family the benefit of the doubt. Now, seeing the evidence stacked in front of me, I finally understood. It was deliberate. Not a misunderstanding, not family stress, but sabotage, step by step. A strange calm washed over me. The army taught us about a tactical patience, waiting for the right moment to strike, even when every nerve wanted to act immediately. I realized that this, too, would be won not by force but by timing. I reviewed the proof with Rachel and Megan. We discussed our next moves like a team preparing for a mission. "We need a plan for when the crowd's attention is highest," I said, thinking aloud. "She'll want to make a toast. That's when everyone will be listening, when her guard is down." Jason nodded, the teacher in him already thinking of the lesson. You can show everyone exactly who she is, in her own words and actions. Rachel, ever the tech-savvy strategist, suggested we back up the video and messages to multiple cloud accounts, USB drives, and even a secure military cloud storage she still had access to from her time in the Army Reserve. Just in case they tried to deny or delete anything. With a plan forming, I felt the fatigue of the day settle into my bones, but I was steadied by purpose. For the first time since childhood, I wasn't playing defense in my family. I was preparing an offensive, one that would expose everything they tried to hide. We agreed on a time, just before dessert, when my mother would give her speech and accept her a due credit. I would signal Rachel, who'd hand the evidence to the AV technician, a young guy named Tyler, whom I'd known since college. "Can you trust him?" Megan asked. "He once covered for me on a midnight run to Coney Island to rescue a lost puppy," I replied with a grin. "He's solid." We walked back into the ballroom as a unit. I felt my confidence returning, not because my wounds were healing, but because I was finally fighting back on my terms. My mother, sensing the shift, tried to regain control with small talk and smiles. Hayley followed her like a shadow. But as I met my guests, my real family, I realized something I'd forgotten. I wasn't alone. The Army had given me a second family, and they were here tonight, standing in my corner. As the music swelled and servers prepared the wedding cake, I found a quiet moment to stand at the edge of the dance floor, watching the city lights glitter beyond the windows. I touched the envelope in my clutch and the phone in my pocket, the weight of truth finally heavier than the weight of history. No matter what happened next, I was ready. As dessert neared and the ballroom's energy swelled, my nerves steadied. Years in the army had taught me to control my adrenaline, to focus when the stakes were highest. This was different than any battlefield I'd known. Here, the weapons were words and reputation, the terrain a glittering Manhattan ballroom filled with family and strangers. But I recognized the signs of a coming ambush, and I was ready. The band played a gentle tune as servers brought out slices of wedding cake, champagne was poured, and people found their seats. My mother stood near the head table, her posture regal, her voice clear as she called for everyone's attention. Beside her, my father hovered in silence, unsure and powerless as always. Haley looked radiant, her eyes fixed on the stage, as if awaiting her next spotlight. Debbie Clark began her speech with effortless poise, thanking guests, reminiscing about family holidays and childhood memories, painting a picture of love and unity that didn't match the reality I'd lived. Each word was another stone in the monument she was building to herself. I watched her, not with anger, but with a kind of professional detachment. I'd seen commanders try to claim credit for what others achieved, watched politicians in dusty tents spin their own heroics. My mother was no different. She was building her legacy in the eyes of the crowd, one perfectly timed pause at a time. But as she shifted from gratitude to praise for her own efforts, I've spent countless hours ensuring this day would be perfect, guiding Allison through the challenges of planning. I caught the AV technician Tyler's eye. He stood at the edge of the room, waiting for my signal, holding the USB Rachel had handed him moments earlier. I nodded. He moved to the booth. Behind my mother, the large screen flickered. The guests, expecting a slideshow of baby photos or highlights from the evening, turned curiously as the image changed. The ballroom stilled. The video began to play. First, it was my mother's voice, clear as a bell, whispering, "You're dead to me." The room seemed to contract, every breath caught. Then, the arc of her arm, the champagne flute in slow motion, the crack of glass against my head. The sound was audible even over the background music. Champagne sprayed, my expression stunned, her mask of concern falling into place. Gasps. Silence. Even the servers froze mid-step. Before my mother could react, the video cut to screenshots, her messages with Haley, lines about moving my seat, scripting the MC, making sure I wouldn't stand so tall. More texts, more planning. Then Haley's replies, eagerness, resentment, anticipation. The final slide was a photo of me, head held high, wedding dress stained, but unbowed. The silence was absolute. My mother turned toward the screen, color draining from her face. Her mouth opened in protest, but no words came. Haley slumped in her chair, eyes wide, exposed. My father finally looked at me, bewildered, unable to muster a single word. I stepped forward. My voice, when it came, was steady, commanding. My whole life I've been told to keep quiet, to protect our family's reputation, to be grateful. Tonight, you've all seen why. Silence is how people like my mother keep control. I let my words hang in the air, not rushing, not shouting. The guests looked at me, some with horror, others with dawning understanding. The weight of truth pressed on the room like gravity. I turned and placed my clutch on the main table before my parents. From it, I took the keys to the family home, an old gold pendant with our crest, and an envelope containing my withdrawal from every joint asset and trust. These belong to you, EI said, voice calm but final. I'm taking back my name, my time, and my life. My mother tried to rise, but the MC instinctively stepped back, microphone out of her reach. My father stared at the tablecloth, jaw clenched, offering her no rescue. In the back, a few guests rose and quietly slipped out. Others started filming. The hotel's event manager appeared near the door, speaking into his headset, eyes flicking between the stage and the clusters of whispering guests. Suddenly, 2 uniformed NYPD officers entered the far side of the ballroom. Their presence cut through the crowd. Conversation stilled, tension thickened. One officer spoke quietly with the event manager. The other scanned the room, eyes landing on my mother. For a moment, the only sound was the faint whir of the projector. My mother tried to explain, to reach for her narrative, but her voice was lost in the murmur of guests and the sharp focus of police attention. Haley began to rise, only to be stopped by Aunt Megan's steady hand on her arm. I looked around the room, at Rachel, at Jason, at the friends and family who'd stood with me. For the first time, I felt the cords of control loosen, then fall away. I'd done what I came to do. I'd turned the tables, reclaimed my voice, and shown everyone the truth. I walked from the stage, through the hush of the ballroom, feeling lighter than I had in years. The ballroom emptied out in waves, some guests leaving in silent shame, others pausing to squeeze my hand or whisper words of support. By the time the NYPD officers escorted my mother aside for questioning, the wedding had become something entirely different. The careful choreography of speeches and dances had been replaced by the unpredictable movements of truth, raw, disruptive, but finally, freeing. I stood near the windows, looking out at the New York skyline as the last golden flecks of sunset disappeared. Jason appeared at my side, sliding his hand into mine. His steadiness felt like home, even among the ruins of everything I'd known. He didn't need to say anything. We stood together for a long, quiet minute. Then Rachel, eyes red-rimmed but fierce, came to hug me. You did it, Ali. You changed the story. You didn't just survive, you won. Aunt Megan squeezed my shoulder, pride and sorrow mingling on her face. They built a prison from your loyalty. You just tore down the walls. That night, instead of a wedding party, my closest friends and my new in-laws gathered with us in Jason's tiny Brooklyn apartment. There was pizza, laughter, and the kind of honest conversation that felt like sunlight after years underground. I wore sweatpants and an old army t-shirt, no longer needing the armor of lace and satin. My phone buzzed relentlessly, calls from reporters, relatives, people who'd seen the video online. By morning, the story was all over the local news. Prominent Manhattan socialite charged with assault at daughter's wedding, the headlines blared. Clips from the video played on loop across social media, complete with hashtags and armchair detectives dissecting every facial expression. Haley disappeared from Instagram, her charity committees quietly removing her name. My father released a statement to his business partners about her personal matters, but the calls stopped coming. It would have hurt, once. Now it felt like relief, a chapter closed, the family script rewritten. My mother, facing legal consequences and abandoned by her usual circle, tried to contact me through her lawyer. I declined every call. I had nothing left to say. For weeks, the city buzzed around us, but our lives became quieter, softer. Jason and I moved into a modest apartment overlooking the harbor in Hoboken, the kind of place where gulls cried and ferry horns marked the hours. At night, I lay awake sometimes, listening to the sound of distant sirens and the gentle breathing of the man beside me, marveling at the simple freedom of peace. I went back to school on the GI Bill, enrolling in a graduate program for counseling veterans. Every day, I met men and women whose stories were like mine, warriors at home but outsiders in their own families. Together, we rebuilt. We learned that survival meant more than endurance. It meant claiming space, demanding truth, and writing a new future. Jason's family became my family in the ways that mattered most. His mother taught me how to make lemon bars from scratch. His brother offered to fix our leaky sink without asking questions. We celebrated birthdays and Sunday dinners, sometimes crowded around a tiny table, sometimes sprawled across the living room floor. There were no speeches, no performances, only the honest messiness of love. Some nights, I'd think back to the ballroom, to the cold shock of glass and champagne, the sting of old betrayals. I didn't regret what I'd done. If anything, I wished I'd found my voice sooner. But I also knew forgiveness, if not for my mother, then for myself. I forgave the years lost to fear and doubt, forgave the girl who tried so hard to belong in a family that could never accept her as she was. The world outside kept spinning, more weddings, more scandals, new cycles of drama. But I'd stepped off that carousel. I chose quiet mornings with coffee and a view of the river, laughter with Jason and Rachel, the soft click of a keyboard as I wrote letters to friends from the army now scattered across the country. One afternoon, as golden light poured through our window, I sat on the balcony, knees tucked to my chest, phone in hand. An email arrived, a thank you note from a young woman in my counseling group. "You showed me how to stand up for myself," as she wrote. "How to speak out. I'm not alone anymore." I closed my eyes, letting that truth settle in. The real legacy wasn't in the Clark name or the family fortune. It was in the ripples of courage, the small rebellions that added up to freedom. As spring turned to summer, Jason and I spent weekends exploring neighborhoods and parks, dreaming of a future filled with possibility. We talked about adopting a dog, maybe taking a road trip across the country. For the first time in my life, my dreams weren't limited by anyone's expectations but my own. On the first anniversary of our wedding that wasn't he, Rachel and Aunt Megan surprised us with a picnic in Central Park. We toasted with lemonade instead of champagne, laughter echoing beneath the trees. There was no bitterness, only a quiet kind of joy, the satisfaction of having survived, of having chosen something better. That evening, Jason pulled me into a dance under the fading light. There was no music, just the distant sound of a saxophone and the steady beat of my heart. I closed my eyes, leaned into his embrace, and breathed in the sweet air of my new beginning. Justice isn't always about punishment, I realized. Sometimes it's just the chance to write your own story, to choose peace over performance, love over loyalty to those who never deserved it. And so, beneath the open New York sky, surrounded by the people who truly saw me, I started the rest of my life, not as a daughter who broke free, but as a woman who finally learned to live.